Hello, everyone. Olin Giles here with Radical Truth. Welcome to another episode of Why Christianity. We have a great show for you tonight. I'm sure of that. I have a colleague from Ratio Christi with me, and he's going to share here in a moment. But before we bring him on, I want to remind you about our website, radicaltruth.net. Radicaltruth.net. You can go there. There's lots of resources, videos, news articles, and I just think you'll find it very helpful. Also want to make you aware of an upcoming debate that looks like I'm going to be moderating in Phoenix, Arizona. This is going to be held on April the 5th. There are going to be two debates this day between Dr. Tony Costa and Shadid Lewis. One debate is, does the Quran confirm or refute the Bible? The other one is, did Jesus' first followers believe that he was God? And then on April the 6th, we have another debate. I'm pretty excited about this one. I love Dr. Tony Costa. He and I have interacted quite a bit, but I have never met Vocab Malone. He's going to be debating Shadid Lewis on April the 6th. And their topic is Christianity or Islam for the Black community? Pretty excited about these debates. If you would like to find out more information about them, you can go to ministrytomuslims.com, ministrytomuslims.com, and you will find these events posted there, and you can contact George Saig and the good folks at Ministry to Muslims for more info. All right, so now I want to go ahead and bring on my good friend, Bill Scott. It's a privilege and an honor to have you with me today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the channel. I know that folks are going to be greatly helped by what you have to say. How you doing, Bill?
Hey, I'm doing good, brother. Thanks for having me on the channel. I'm very excited. We've been talking about doing this for like a year or something, and we're both southern fellers, so I hope people can keep up with their accents tonight.
So. That's right. Yeah, I just come back from almost a month in Chicago, and had an amazing time up there. But I don't think any of that Chicago accent rubs off on me, so I think I'm right there with you still.
You're not saying sausages?
Nah. Get in the car.
Did you eat any pizza? Did you eat any pizza while you were up there getting that Chicago style deep dish?
I did not. I'll be honest with you. I stayed at a place called Wayside Cross Ministries, and they gave me a free place to stay, fed me. This was a drug rehabilitation center, and I just spent as much time with those guys as I possibly could. Day one, the first day I'm there, they told me there was a Muslim there, and I knew if there was a Muslim in this place, he was not there by choice, and didn't know what to expect. But he was a young African-American young man. His name's Timmy, and they introduced me to him, and I'll tell you what, the Holy Spirit was already there working on him. I shared the gospel with him, and he confessed Christ day one in Chicago. So, yeah. So the whole trip was a blessing. I could say more, but I don't want to steal the show. No,
man, that's awesome. That'd be a good. Yeah. I'll tell you what, we'll get you on my show. I want to hear about that because that's where I came from. It's like, I was on drugs and then got saved in jail and stuff, and yeah. So wow, that's awesome, man. And working in juvenile detention centers and things. Early in my ministry, I ran into a lot of young African American gentlemen that were falling down that path of not even real Islam. It's a very American version of a Malcolm X version of it. So yeah, it was wow. Well, good for you. Yeah, I guess that's good enough excuse not to eat any pizza.
Yeah, I didn't. I was on a pretty tight budget too, so I tried not to spend any more money than I had to. I went to Chick-fil-A 3 or 4 times, but that was about it.
Did all your Christian duties,
Yeah.
That's great.
Gave Chick-fil-A my share of my budget.
There you go. Well, great. Well, thanks for
tell us about your topic tonight. I'm sorry, brother, didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Oh no, it's okay. Like we're going to talk about these, like, I do a lot of traveling for Ratio Christi as the incoming director of their international operations, and man, and I just want to talk tonight about what I see in the world, what's going on. I mean, how my PhD dissertation topic even shifted because of what I see going on in the world. And I'm really interested right now. Interested would be one way to describe it. Infuriated would be another, because, it's just, when you travel enough and you keep hearing the same thing over and over and over again about what's going on in the world with, Western influence, not just from YouTube and TikTok and social media and Hollywood, but the direct influence from some of our governmental systems in some of these countries absolutely infuriates me, man. And we're not the ones that do that. I mean, you study Islam, and there's almost like a colonialization of ideas coming from both sides in some of these sub-Saharan African countries and Asian countries and things. You have, Salafi and Wahhabi Muslims setting up schools and indoctrinating people and spreading utter lies about the church, saying that Christianity is a white man's religion and things like that. And then on the other side of that, you have these Western powers like the European Union, the United States Democratic Party mainly, and and who else? United Nations and things like purposely as part of their agenda, pushing things like LGBTQ and abortion rights and things like that. And honestly, a lot of these countries were just up in arms about this, and many of them praying, maybe not necessarily for a Trump victory. Many of them were, but to them, Trump represented, the Christian side of the aisle, that clearly to them, the Christian side of the aisle even. And some of those conversations that you have are so unlike the conversations that are going on in the United States. I just find all of that very, very interesting and very integral to our ministry in Ratio Christi, which is to transform lives today on college campuses and combat these worldview ideas head on, and then change the culture tomorrow, which is what we hope we're doing by creating solid, thoughtful Christian community, and by and large thoughtful Christians that will in the future determine the course and path of their country.
Hey man, let's I just thought about it. There's I don't mention Ratio Christi a whole lot on my channel, but a lot of my viewers may not know it. But I'll let you explain what Ratio Christi means here in a moment. But I just want to just take a quick moment here and let our viewers know that you and I both work with Ratio Christi. I am the director at Ratio Christi Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina, and I've been doing that for almost 2 years now. Have a great group of students. I've never been more encouraged. But explain to our viewers who may not be familiar with this organization what Ratio Christi means, if you would.
Yeah. Now, Ratio Christi, correct me if I'm wrong, Olin, but I believe it started at App State.
That's exactly right. You're right. Yeah.
So right around 2008, there was a gentleman by the name of Simon Brace, and there's a few others who were attending to hear Simon tell it. He was attending a William Lane Craig conference in North Carolina there, and some sort of talk at a college, maybe at App State, I don't know. Yeah. And he said, boy, this stuff is great. We really need this kind of ministry right now in these colleges, because we have Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, coming out, and those are being handed out on campus. And it was in the height of the New Atheist movement, which was Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, who still has a pretty big YouTube following and public intellectual following today, and Christopher Hitchens, who sadly died of cancer a few years ago. But yeah, that the New Atheist movement was different in the sense that it was like we got to shout down Christians and shut them up in the public square and get them out of office. I mean, they're very militant in the way they operated. So Simon was like, well, let's start something to combat these ideas in the colleges, and that's how Ratio Christi was started. So they started a mission organization that attaches itself to a college campus to teach students how to defend their faith, live out God's word, and combat the lies of our culture on college campus. As I already said, our motto, we're transforming lives today, changing the culture tomorrow, because we believe, as the Bible teaches, that if what did the early church, what was said of the early church in the book of Acts? They turned the world upside down. Or as one of my professors, Steve Bagby, used to say, they turned the world right side up, actually. And, because that's what Christians do. I mean, we were the first, Christians were the first ones to advocate for human rights and the rights of, of unborn children, or not unborn children, but, while Rome was laying babies out to die of exposure if they weren't wanted, Christians were the ones saying, no, let's bring these babies into an orphanage. And, that's what we've always done. We've always transformed the culture, and, largely Western society is built on those Christian foundations. And what happens when you throw those out? There's good reason why people are saying Africa is the future of the church right now, because the West is throwing out their Christian foundations, while Africans are saying, no, that's not going to happen here. We don't want that here. It's quite amazing. So yeah,
absolutely. And all this,
we have a visitor. I'm going to introduce you all to somebody. Right. I didn't realize I had a cat in my YouTube studio right now. She just jumped up on my desk, and she's about to make a mess of everything. So this is Lily, everybody. She doesn't know any boundaries. So there we go. Get the cat off the desk there. Okay. I was actually holding her back while I was talking.
He's trying to fight her off. Huh?
Yeah. So anyway, yeah,
we've got a cat too, but I don't let him in the house too often. I would if my wife wouldn't mind it, but we got a bunch of kids that are allergic to him, so we don't let him in too much. But love my cat.
Yeah, you're a cat person. I knew I liked you.
But to go back to what you were saying, this goes very well with 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. And, I think as a culture here in the West, we've gotten very comfortable in how we do church. And, we have churches filled with people on Sunday mornings who don't really know why they believe what they believe. They're just kind of there doing, this church thing, and they can't, a lot of them can't defend the gospel or even explain to you what the gospel is. And I think we've gotten away from this idea of spiritual warfare as a battle of ideas. And that's what I hear you saying, and that's what I believe we've got to get back to as these atheists and Islamic apologists or whoever, as they become more militant. It's going to be crucial that the church is equipping their people to share and defend the historical Christian gospel. So,
yeah, that's right. Only because it says there in 2 Corinthians 10 that our job as Christians, not just as apologists, but our job as Christians, is to tear down strongholds that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. And that word stronghold there is like a fortress in somebody's mind, and that's what a lot of people are facing. And what I see, it's sad. It's very sad because sometimes in these more developing countries, like I was speaking in Rwanda last year, and they didn't even have, the translator didn't know how to translate the word apologetics into their language there, because they had never been confronted with that word before. They didn't know exactly what apologetics was. So I'm in a room full of pastors hearing about apologetics for the first time. And when I start doing some expository teaching on what the New Testament says about sexual ethics and things, they were just blown away. They're like, wow, we didn't know that there were good answers to this in the Bible. And it's like, well, beyond that, there are good answers in a lot of different fields, actually, not just the Bible. So
Absolutely. We're in a battle of ideas, and you were talking about Africa there. I don't want to get us too far off topic, but I couldn't help but think of Matt Walsh's documentary "What Is a Woman?" when he asks he asks those Africans a few questions. He puts forth some of the ideas that are being put forth in our society today here in the West, and they just laughed. I remember.
I watched that documentary after I was in several African countries this summer, and a bunch of the Africans over there loved that documentary for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Not just because it features Africans. I think those are actually Maasai tribe people in Kenya, which are a very interesting group of people. I've interacted with them before. But yeah, it's pretty cut and dry to them. And that's what I really appreciate about my African brothers and sisters. They really don't put it in Southern terms. They don't play with no mess. They ain't messing
right.
They're like the Bible just says this, so I don't know why we need to debate it. Like it's pretty simple to them.
I thought it was one of the funniest parts of the documentary, but anyhow, let's get to your story. I want to hear what I want to hear about you, and just share with us your story, kind of up to your you're working on a PhD right now, or are you finished with your PhD?
No, I'm working on a PhD in intercultural studies at Biola. Yeah, I'm a PhD candidate right now. So,
well, share with us how you got to that point.
Well, to keep it short, I started back in 2010. Let's reel it back a couple more years. Pretty much the most successful I was ever in my secular life, I would call it. Most success I'd ever had was I was interning for Democratic politicians in 2008, and actually worked on the Obama campaign back in those days. And I had a totally different worldview from a Christian worldview. At that time, I was more of a New Age Buddhist hippie. I was selling pot to my buddies, and that escalated and turned into psychedelic drugs, and then got hooked on pills, and typical Eastern Kentucky story. And I was raised in Eastern Kentucky, very isolated area. Matter of fact, the city I was raised in was the city that J.D. Vance wrote that book about, Hillbilly Elegy. That's my hometown, Jackson, Kentucky. So as I was, as I was sitting there in jail, I went to a church service one night because I just wanted to buy some cigarettes. I really wasn't looking for Jesus, but he was looking for me. So
Amen.
The Lord really touched my heart, changed my life that night. Very powerful. Some people say like Apostle Paul type conversion, where I was just all in from the get-go. Just like, then the judge released me from jail the next day, dropped a $15,000 bond off the books to a surety bond, and parents checked me out. That was on a Thursday. On a Friday when I got out of jail, went to church on Sunday and never looked back. I started doing drug recovery ministry, then youth ministry, then pastoral ministry. We pastored a church for about 5 years in Eastern Kentucky. And then as I was doing all the youth ministry, drug recovery ministry, and even the Sunday mornings, I was quoting like apologists and things. I was always attracted to apologetics coming out of the atheistic, agnostic, New Age Buddhist, like the hodgepodge of all those ideas I had. Apologetics was always real formative for me, Olin. So I was always like, man, I've got to tell other people there are good reasons to believe in Christianity. I was just always there. Then one of my mentors told me I was getting ready to graduate. The Lord had worked it out. That's another miracle story. The Lord worked it out for me to get a undergrad in biblical studies and religion at a Bible college back in Kentucky, at Kentucky Mountain Bible College, best Bible college you've never heard of, but check it out. It really is a good school. And I felt like I got a really good education that served me well when I did my master's. And one of my mentors there, he said just point blank, he said, Bill, you need to go into apologetics. We need people like you out there that can communicate and things. And so I didn't know what I was getting into. I came down to KMBC, or came down to Houston Christian University to do a master's degree in apologetics. And first thing we do is open up the existence of God. Who wrote that? Gosh, it wasn't John Frame. It's one of those British guys. Shoot, forgot the author. But anyway, he used Bayesian calculus to prove the existence of God. I've got Google right here in front of me. That's going to drive me crazy.
That's what I was doing.
yeah. Let's see. The existence of God. My brain will probably figure this out for as I'm typing it in. Oh, here it is. It's Richard Swinburne. Nope, Swinburne. Swinburne's The Existence of God. I'm sitting there. Anybody that's ever dove into that for the first time knows, like, if you don't have a calculus background, it can lose you a little bit. So I'm like, man, what have I got myself into here? And I really found my home in cultural apologetics. I love the analytic stuff too, but I'm really, really passionate about the pastoral side of apologetics, where this is the kind of stuff, if people could just understand the truth, it would just set them free. And if you really understood the implications of this worldview that you're adopting, it'll just, So I did my master's there. I did, an MA in cultural apologetics, and I just loved it so much, I went ahead and did a graduate certificate in philosophical apologetics. In the meantime, I was working for Ratio Christi, and when I got there, we had about 4 students on campus in our Ratio Christi program. We got there in the middle of COVID. We raised all of our funding. We were full-time, so we had all that in our favor. But we only had 4 students, and we prayed and asked the Lord to help us on that. Well, lo and behold, within a semester, we had 40 students.
Wow.
Lord just sent us a slew of students, and it was just awesome to watch that grow. And so we've nurtured that now for about 4 years, and it's getting to the place where the students are just really doing a great job, and they know their job and they're doing things. So then the president of Ratio Christi contacted me just about a month after I got into this PhD program at Biola in intercultural studies. And when Corey Miller reached out to me, he said, we really need somebody in line to be the successor in the next couple of years for our international department. And so, I prayed about it, said yes. And so now it's like the Lord's just put all these things together, and here I am. Yeah. And I'm pretty, I love it, which, brings me to what we were talking about here today. While I'm, going through these adventures, like the Lord's done many things to confirm that calling. And, so we can talk about that as we go on. So, but I'll just pause there.
Some of our viewers may be, wondering, why all the education, why the PhD, why are you doing all this? And I deal with this constantly myself. I'm not working on a PhD. I'm working on my second master's. But this thing called apologetics is clearly taught in the Bible, and I've seen it work. We know it works, and you have to have a good education, I think, in the secular world and some of the arguments that they're putting forth to be able to counter them effectively. Basically what I did while I was in Chicago was 2 weeks of apologetics training with these 50-something guys, and I can tell you their lives were changed. And the same thing could be said on the university campus. These are, the students that you're talking about, the students on university campuses all over the world, or especially all over the United States. These are the next leaders. These are the next politicians. The next a group of people that's going to be the most influential people in the world, or in the United States. And it just makes good sense that we help them understand why they believe what they believe.
Yeah. Well, people, we want to be clear that people can do, and I know a couple of people that have done they've made a career in apologetics without ever going to school. I mean,
Right.
I know. I mean, the resources we have available. I'd say there's one caveat to that, though. We have all kinds of apologetics resources out there, but both of those guys have one thing in common. They've had people over them that are steering them down the right direction. Because there's a lot of, like in any field, there's like when you start studying ancient texts. I mean, we just saw that Wes Huff and Billy, whatever is, I was never even knew about that Billy guy until,
Billy Carson.
Billy Carson. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that guy was studying all kinds of stuff that is important to study. He was just doing it the wrong way, wrong methodology. Wes Huff made a fool out of him on Facebook. If you've not seen that debate, or not Facebook, but on YouTube.
Yeah.
Because, Billy Carson just simply didn't know what he was talking about because he'd studied it all the wrong ways. But that said, you can study it the right way and do fine, never go to school. But I'm like you, Olin, I think Christians ought to be taking education dead serious. Like, I'm an apologist for education. It really grieves me when I see, like, 9 times out of 10 when pastors or teachers or apologists, that they don't have any Bible college education. They don't have any hermeneutics classes. They don't have any Greek or Hebrew background. They don't have any exegesis stuff. I mean, the proclivity to error is just going to be there, and you have to be careful about that. So that said, not all, but definitely some do go down that path where they just come up with strange interpretations about stuff that, like, well, why'd you teach it that way? But anyway, when it comes to apologetics, you have to know what's going on in the culture and what creates culture. We tend to think that culture creates people. We tend to say it's like, well, this American school system is making an atheist out of my child. It's like, no, the American school system's not necessarily doing that. It's the people teaching in the American school system that's doing that.
Right.
I know good, godly teachers that don't do that, but there are a slew of ungodly teachers that are teaching things in another direction, And where did that come from? Well, that came from American universities and European universities, if you look at it in the global perspective. And so how do you combat that? Well, what if you had Christian professors? Christian professors are proven to be more objective, teach things, they're not there with a Christian agenda per se.
Right.
But it's, they're there to show people the truth. Like, Christians will intrinsically care more about what is true than a non-Christian. That might sound controversial, but I think there's something to that, because if you know your Bible and you understand the nature of truth, Christians understand that all truth is God's truth, right? So you have like scientific like the scientific revolution. A lot of our scientific apologetics look back at that and say, these were Christian people like Johannes Kepler, for example, who said, I'm just trying to discover God's thoughts after him, or something like that. He's just, his whole, what drove his science was trying to understand the God who has created all things,
Right.
And let's be fair. I mean, that's true with some of the early Muslim scholarship too. I'm sure you know that, Olin. There are some people, like, was it Al-Ghazali that came up with the Kalam cosmological argument? And almost every Christian apologist can quote the Kalam cosmological argument now.
Right.
And it makes me wonder sometimes, especially the younger ones, I wonder if they even know that came from a Muslim scholar. William Lane Craig's popularized it, but God is a good thing. I mean, honestly, pursuing truth is a good idea. And I believe that the Christian God is the clearest, all the evidence points to it being the Christian God. I'm unashamed of that, just to be clear.
Yeah.
When you take that out of a society, when you take that out of a university, all that you're going to have left is error. You're either trying to move toward God or away from him. And when you're trying to move away from him, then you're going to skirt around things like this, like like Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, saying years ago that it's more probable that aliens planted human beings here as seeds on this planet than God created them. It's like, this is the kind of foolishness that we are left with, you know? So yeah, so I think it's very, very important that we take that seriously, and we take education seriously. And we do, you know, like I remember Ben Shapiro saying that one of the reasons that he went to, I think it was USC, University of Southern California, he said, I went there not because it would validate what I believed. I went there to try to understand how our culture is thinking. And so if we can teach our kids to even think that way, it's like, remember, like, you're going to be a culture changer one of these days. Anybody that goes to university is. Right. Some part of this world, you're going to change it. So you need to evaluate what's being said and be able to use solid Christian truth to evaluate that stuff and build a foundation in your own life. And that's one of those things, not to say that we've got it all figured out, but I mean, it's one of the things that Rochelle Christie's doing really well, I think, is that we're seeing this problem. We're saying, now this is what we got to do about it, you know, and then we're doing it. It's one thing to say, one thing to spot the problem. It's another thing to go out and try to fix it. Right. You know, so,
but you know, the truth is on our side. You know, why wouldn't we?
Right.
You know, we have the truth, we have the evidence, and you know, the more I study Islam, I mean, especially the historical evidence that is just piled up against Islam, and it's clearly on our side. Why wouldn't we use this historical evidence, you know, whatever you want to call it? Why wouldn't we try to tear down these barriers that Muslims have? The same thing could be said about atheism. You know, the evidence is on our side. It's not on the side of atheism. We have this abundance of evidence that we can present to these, you know, these unbelievers, and, you know, whatever you want to call it, pre-evangelism, apologetics. This is something that's clearly taught in the Bible, and there's just no reason at all not to be doing apologetics.
Right. Well, it's like, it's not hard to me. I don't think it takes near as much faith to be a Christian as it does to be an atheist. I mean,
that's right.
I mean, Christians, yeah, we believe in some nutty stuff like the virgin birth, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that God created all things. But it's honestly easier to believe that than nothing created the universe and the virgin birth of the universe. Like, come on, like, which one of these things just is more plausible? To me?
Pick your miracle, right?
Right, pick your miracle. You know. So, not to be dismissive, I highly respect some of my atheist friends. I've got some good atheist friends. Yeah. But I honestly, like, the burden of proof that you have to set on your shoulders to think atheism is plausible, I think it's frankly ridiculous, nonsensical.
Yeah. Well, we have these conversations with them, whether they be atheists or Muslims or whoever. We have these conversations because we care about these people,
right?
And we care about where they're going to spend eternity, and that means we want to engage them in meaningful conversation. We want to share the gospel with them. We want to give them these reasons why we believe Christianity is true. And
yeah.
Anyhow, we're kind of all over the board, but that's quite all right. Yeah, we don't really have you know, too much of an agenda in the show today, but I do want to try to reel it back in just a little bit if I can, and ask you a question. There's, you know, what's called the Department of Government Efficiency. And there have been some recent discoveries. Tell us about them and how that relates to what you and I are talking about right now.
The Doge, yeah. So yeah. Well, what's going on with Doge is it's really interesting. And you know, because there's some, of course, it's controversial. Still trying to figure out what I feel about it, but some of these things that Elon Musk and company are discovering were very confirmatory of some of the things that I have seen. I'm pulling up kind of a check sheet here. I was actually doing research for this, like on this week, and just kind of making a checklist on something that I'm particularly interested in. Which is like the spreading of LGBT ideologies, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit. I think that when in 2019, I went to Kenya, and nobody was talking about homosexuality. Well, now everybody is. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, so according to the Washington Times, so since USAID, U.S. Foreign Aid Department, was created in 1961, it stands for the U.S. Agency for International Development. So as of March 2024, according to the FedScope database, USAID employed 4,675 people, many of them overseas. Fiscal year 2023, USAID distributed nearly $43.8 billion in foreign aid to about it's like 3 of every 5 foreign assistance dollars. So think about that. The majority of the world's foreign aid was coming from us. So starting in late January, the Trump administration began trying to dismantle this stuff. And so we have what they've discovered so far is, look, we've had our hands in at least 32 different countries, and this is just in the last 2 years. And in those 32 countries, like we are in charge of almost like one entire fifth of the entire world's advocacy for LGBTQ ideology, just the United States of America. And all of that goes through USAID, because what happens is, this is really important to understand. When we hear the United States is advocating for human rights, you have to think first about who is saying human rights, because when we think of human rights, the first thing that comes to my mind is some of the great missionaries, right? Like, like Amy Carmichael building orphanages in India and combating the caste system, or, trying to stop the practice of sati over there, where they were still burning women alive when their husbands passed away. The children would throw their mothers on the funeral pyres and stuff. And, it was Christian missionaries that got things like that stopped. Or in the 20th century, you had Christian missionaries going to Papua New Guinea and teaching the Papua New Guineans for the first time, and saying, like, surviving long enough to get a Bible in their language and teach them that cannibalism should not be practiced. Like that voice, and like everybody agrees with that kind of human rights, those kinds of human rights. And I think we all ought to be on board for that. But when you talk about somebody who is a politician, when they say human rights, like, what does that mean? Well, to the American left, to the Biden administration, to the Obama administration, especially, that meant we need to advocate for gay rights and abortion rights. It was almost like anti-human rights. Yeah. And so some of the things that Doge is, as controversial as all that is, some of the things that they have started to discover, which is just mind-blowing to me, is that we've given $1.5 million to advance diversity and equity and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities. Gave $1.5 million to that. This is one of my personal favorites. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. Our tax dollars hard at work overseas. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. And so, like, when you start looking at this stuff, and I want to dive deeper into this and talk about my experiences in the last doing African missions over the last 5 years, and talk about some of the things. This is where we're going. For those of you watching the podcast live, this is where we're going with this. Like, all right, well, what's all this have to do with? Well, we're going on a trajectory right here. So this is what's important to me. Okay. When you go into 8 different countries last year, okay, that's what I did last summer. 10, if you count the scope, like 1 was underground, and then, So 8 countries in the summer, 1 underground country I can't mention in spring, and then I was in Brazil, Sao Paulo, Brazil in fall. Every single one of those countries had one question: how do we talk to the college students, Gen Z, about LGBT ideologies? Every one of them. We're talking about Nigeria, okay? Nigeria, Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Romania, Brazil, already mentioned Brazil, Cambodia, Malaysia, Philippines, all had the same question. When they looked at my CV and saw that there were like 40 talks on there that they could choose from, I've got one talk on homosexuality in every single conference, every country. They would choose about 3 talks. All of them chose that one because that's one of the biggest problems in the church in the entire world right now. And one of the things that really bothers me is I don't know that we're equipping our missionaries that we're sending overseas, and I certainly don't know if we're equipping the church to be able to combat this.
Yeah.
And so it amazes me when I was overseas. Of course, that was during the election cycle this last summer, and all of them were saying, we're praying for a Trump victory in the United States. I'm like, really? You know, when you're talking about sub-Saharan Africans praying for Trump, when you hear over here that he's like Nazi, racist, all this stuff, well, they were looking at that as just foolish, because they're like, look, we've been dealing with the Biden administration pushing stuff down our throat with these ideologies, LGBT stuff. And so there's this council, right, called the Global Equality Council, and their chair is called Mark Bromley. So he told the Blade in the United States, this is what he said. Let me find the quote here. He said, roughly a third of the global LGBT rights movement is funded by the United States. Isn't that amazing? 1/3 of the global LGBT rights movement was funded by the United States. And then and just his organization, the Council for Global Equality, is set to lose more than $50 million. And this is what he said, as if this was a bad thing. He said, it's a catastrophe. Bromley added, it will be challenging, if not impossible, to fill their funding gap. He said there isn't a short-term way to fill the current funding gap. And he closed with, it sets the movement back at least 10 years. Now think about that. Now, I'm certainly not turning this into a campaign speech, but this is why the majority of the global church was praying for Donald Trump to win the presidency, because to them, it wasn't really about Trump. It was about the only way to get this to stop is to stop America from pushing it on us. And so that should make us take 2 steps back and say, whoa, like, what are we doing here? And what are we voting for and advocating for? But more than that, where are all these ideas coming from? They're obviously coming from universities. And what happens at the university, you know, I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a medical doctor back over Christmas break, and he put it perfectly. He said, the first time I heard about gender constructionism, the gender being just a social construct, he said, I was in a philosophy class in 2005 in my university. And I remember thinking, because he's in a biology class the day before, he's like, I remember thinking, what a stupid thing. Like, if this is what philosophy is, I don't want anything to do with it. He's like, that was just the dumbest thing I've ever heard come out of somebody's mouth. He said, I would never in a million years think that 20 years later that a significant portion of the United States would actually believe that, and not least an entire political party platform it. And all of a sudden we have athletes that have testicles competing against women. It's like, what happened here? Like this is a battle, man. It's a battle. And this is just, and I don't want us to think, well, this is just happening with LGBT. No, it's happening for abortion, even euthanasia. I mean, think about that we're granting people the rights to take their own lives. And that comes from one direction. Sad to say, it's one side of the aisle, and it just grieves my spirit, So to me, it's not about like a political thing necessarily. It's really like the politics are just indicative of the culture, and the culture is indicative of several individuals' thought life coming together as a group.
These are the same people too that have, told us for years, don't shove your religion down our throat, and now they are not only forcing these ideas on us, the American people, but now they're spending our tax dollars, sending this stuff overseas to other countries and forcing it down their throats. It's so hypocritical.
It's absolutely hypocritical.
Yeah.
Well, they like to think that there's a separation of church and state in this country, but that certainly wasn't the case during COVID when the state was telling all the churches to keep their doors shut. So we should really think that like that's all an illusion. Like we really are in a battle, in my opinion.
So how did this work out in Kenya? Were you able to cover that?
Well, the amazing thing is, partly by God's sovereignty, Olin, is that so as you well know, I did my master's thesis at HCU in Islamic apologetics. Like I was on that trajectory, right? I was going to do a PhD in Islamic studies and all this,
right?
And I still think there's good reason why people should do that. So I don't want to poo-poo on anybody who's wanting to do that, but for me personally, what happened was I was working with Apologetics Kenya. I was going over to Kenya, not even with Ratio Christi. I was going with a buddy of mine from here in Houston, and we went to Burundi and had some it was just regular. I would call it just your average African mission trip where you go over and you preach and you talk and you see people get saved, and it was wonderful. And wasn't anything Ratio Christi affiliated. And so we went to Burundi. We saw about 250 people accept Christ. Some people we preached to, they'd heard the gospel for the first time up in these villages and isolated parts of the mountains and stuff. It was beautiful, man. It was absolutely wonderful. And so while I'm prepping to go on this thing, we're going to go to Burundi and then Kenya. I get connected with Apologetics Kenya, which is ran by a guy named Kevin Marithi. He just wrote a book on African apologetics. Highly recommend that to anybody. And he, it's an edited volume with several different scholars writing into it. It's fantastic, actually. It's published by Langham Press. I think it's called Introduction to African Apologetics. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's what it's called. But Kevin was like, I know that you're a world religions guy, but I just wonder, and this was March 2023 or something. So we had this plan in January. So this is March. So plan was come over, talk about Islam. Then March came. And he said, I hate to change plans on you because I know that you're getting ready to come over here, but could you come over and talk to our students about LGBT? And it just so happened that I was finishing up my master's degree at HCU, and I was in Nancy Piercy's Love Thy Body class, right? And she had written a fantastic book concerning LGBT, transgenderism, all this other stuff. So specifically the gay and transgender movements and things. So it was, you have to differentiate. That's two different movements. And not the rabbit trail, but ironically, the classically gay movement where it says I'm born this way really does not like the whole transgender movement. Like a lot of people have pointed that out. And so I'm like, well, yeah, I could put together something. He said, what we'd really like to see is just from an American perspective, you don't have to overdo it or anything. Just, I'm like, well, I could at least do that. And so I put together a talk and I went over there and I started talking to people, and come to find out that the same day that Jill Biden landed in Nairobi, they flipped on all of their homosexuality laws in Parliament that they'd had on the books for decades and decades, ever since they were an English colony, British colony. And I'm like, man, this is crazy. And it started a movement there that they're still trying to put out. They're still trying to put out. And so the president responded to Parliament by saying, well, we're never going to have gay marriage here. And so part of that was like, there's an immediate, like guardrail put up, unlike what we did here. But what the initial passing did was allow non-governmental organizations, they call them NGOs over there, came and set up. So you had overnight Planned Parenthood, Freedom from Religion Foundation, all of the bad guys from the United States showing up over there, starting to get their roots put in East Africa. Now, the scary thing is, like, all of that's very strategic. As somebody who's leading a global mission organization, I knew before we even got off the ground that you really needed about 3 countries to really start focusing in on Africa. South Africa in the south, Nigeria up in the west, and Kenya in the east is probably like the 3 most influential countries. So significant that South Africa is already like starting to fall into this stuff. I mean, they've been doing liberation theology and critical theory down there for decades. But in West Africa, in East Africa, Kenya had never fallen, and so I was like, wow. So it's like a strategic bullseye sniper rifle type plan that they're doing here. So America got into there, and so then I went and just toured around these universities in Nairobi, Kenya, capital of Kenya, there, and spoke to the students. We saw a lot of students repent of homosexuality and things like that. Before you know it, I was on radio shows and TV stations. Like, everybody was talking about this. It was a major cultural moment. So yeah, so that was 2023, and yeah, we'll just pause there, see if you have any questions or anything. We can talk about last summer. So.
Yeah, I just find it interesting that all that stuff has made its way overseas like that. I'm a little surprised, to be honest with you. I mean, especially what I had in my comments about Matt Walsh's video. Of course, he was just in a part of Africa there, but it's very interesting that this is how our tax dollars are being spent, and this is how these people have been influenced. It's pretty sad, really.
Yeah, no reason why we shouldn't be speaking up against it. I mean, that's your money, my absolutely. Money. Right. It's crazy. I mean, it's what we're supposed to be doing. Speak up against that. But yeah, it's Matt Walsh actually was in Kenya. He was with the Maasai tribe in Kenya. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but it's just like it is over here, Olin. The majority of people, I mean, I think this last election proved that more than anything else. The majority of people are not on board with this. It's a very loud minority of people. And it's the same way over in Kenya. A very loud minority. Kenyans, they're actually a little bit smarter than us. So they know that right off the bat. They know that. They're like, this is a loud minority of usually corrupt government officials that just want more United Nations foreign aid money and things like that too. And, the American Democratic Party was not the only ones trying to do this. It's also an agenda with United Nations and European Union as well, which is what I discovered in last summer,
Right.
Which when all this stuff started coming out, when Doge started doing their thing, it was amazing to see where all this money was going, because, when you hear things in the field, you're like, okay, this is what I heard. And then you hear things in the United States. It's like, how do you know it's a conspiracy versus this versus that? And what's the extent of our influence and things? And if one thing that this USAID thing has done for me is shown me just how deep all this goes,
right?
And how we have our work cut out for us. That we just don't have our operating budget for Ratio Christi International is something like $40,000. We don't have $50 million to spread around the global whatever fund for homosexual rights or whatever.
Yeah.
But what we do have is more powerful than that. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's
right. Yeah,
and that's where I rest my hope and faith, and the truth of God that will set the captives free. And that's where I just think, and we're already seeing some movement back in the other direction. So the Lord's answering prayer. I've got a lot of hope. So,
well, what you're saying kind of reminds me of Dr. Timothy C. Tennant's book. I can't even remember the title of it.
Yeah,
Theology in the global context or something. I butchered the title there. I'm not, but he talks about how, right now the majority of worldwide believers is outside of the West, and even the epicenter is in Africa.
Yeah,
and yet we here in the West are the influential minority, really.
Yeah.
And so this LGBT influence that is taking place, we can't treat this lightly. And I know you realize that. All of our viewers realize that, but this is why it's just so important to confront it. And even though we are now especially in America, we're not the largest concentration of Christians in the world.
No.
But yet we are some of the most influential Christians in the world. So I think that's my point.
Yeah. Well, even that, I mean, America as a whole is influential,
Yeah, that's right.
Just in general. But, but even in, I mean, if you look at what happened with the United Methodist Church over the last few years, I mean, the global Methodist Church happened, concentrated in Africa. Like the African church just said, all right, we've had enough of this. Like, we're not going to start ordaining homosexual pastors and things like that.
Right.
That's just not going to happen. So we're going to leave. And so that's what birthed the Global Methodist Church. And that's been I think they just sent a message with that, and there's a massive reformed movement going on. I see that everywhere in Africa. There's just a lot of reformed theology just moving around the continent, and a lot of solid thinkers, coming out of that movement. A lot of people taking education very seriously. You have, we just planted a Ratio Christi chapter in Kenya at a Africa International University. It's the largest evangelical university in East Africa, and they are educating hundreds of African Christians every year, just graduating from that place and going all over the continent, with solid theological education too. I mean, I've bought a few of their books, and they have professors being published by Langham Press and other academic presses and things. So yeah, it's not that they're even behind us anymore. There are some people maybe even going before us now, and who knows what the future has in store for that. But yeah, it's it is very, very interesting that not just them, but South America too. They've got a lot of smart people down there. Southeast Asia, just here lately been looking into theological colleges in Hong Kong and places like that, where they have top tier apologists, philosophers, and theologians teaching at some of these places now. Yeah, we've taken for granted. We always think that America is invincible, but man, cultural shifts happen. And that Tim Tennant book, by the way, that was one of our textbooks. I looked it up on Logos here. It's Theology.
Here too. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Theology in the world. Yeah, theology in the context of world Christianity. Yeah.
Give the subtitle too. I think that's very important.
Yeah. Well, you give
how the global church is influencing the way we think about and discuss theology.
That's right. Yeah, I couldn't bring up the subtitle right away.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of powerful truth in that book, man. Tim Tennant is he's absolutely in intercultural studies. He's one of our heroes. I mean, he's right up there, man.
A lot of the information is outdated in that book, but it's still worth what you pay for it. It is, like you said, it's packed full of information that's still relevant today. The only thing that's outdated is some of the numbers.
Right. I was going to say, like, the theories and ideas like honor, shame, power, fear, culture, cultural dynamics, things like that, still good, still solid stuff. Yeah. So yeah. So it's pretty sad. It's been pretty interesting when I was doing the research on all the USAID stuff, it kept showing up, like, you'd click on something, it would take you to a Facebook page, and there would be several comments underneath a news story about foreign aid being cut from places. And, a surprising number of Africans saying, good, we need to cut ties with Western foreign powers. We need to learn how to be independent. And it's like, but the other side of that's my heart does break for these people who are, I mean, let's face it, cutting U.S. aid means like some people are going to go hungry. Some people are not going to have food tomorrow. Some people are, that's reality. But what we've done is we've created a system where some of these countries are almost like there's a certain part of their population that's just about helpless without us. And then we use that to say like, hey, if you want this foreign aid to keep coming, then you need to accept gay marriage. Now that's what Barack Obama tried to do in 2015 when he visited Kenya. When I went to Kenya in 2019, a lot of the Kenyans were still trying to figure out Donald Trump and where he stood. And some of them thought that he was racist. They were watching American news outlets like CNN and stuff. Like, is he really racist? Like, I would get those kind of questions. But one thing that they knew for sure was that they did not like Barack Obama, even though his dad was Kenyan and part of one of their tribes there in, like, I think it was the northeast part of the country. They didn't like Barack Obama. I was like, why didn't you like Barack Obama? Why don't you like him? Like, his dad's tied to here. And I met a guy on the train station in Nairobi when I was on my way to Mombasa, and he goes, oh yeah, his dad's part of our tribe. I don't like him though. And then he was kind of speaking for all of these Kenyans I'd talked to. All of them said the same thing. He came over here and tried to tell our president that he wanted to give us $150 million in foreign aid, but they would have to accept gay rights and gay marriage and all these other things before he would give it to them. And the president said, basically, like, look over here. With all due respect, President, over here is one of the largest slums in the world. And over here are all these people starving. Over here we have these things going on. Nobody in this country is thinking about homosexual marriage. And if that's what you're here to try to promote, then we don't need $150 million from the United States. And everybody's basically treated him like a hero for standing up to the Western foreign powers that were pushing their ideas on people. And so yeah. And what's amazing about that is they are so ready to, like, Christianize their culture and say, like, all the good things about our culture are largely Christian, and we need to preserve that with everything that we have in us. So when they see a ministry like Ratio Christi that's taking cultural apologetics and moving it into a culture, they're like, this is what we've needed all along. So we planted 4 missionaries there in August, and they've already grown 3 more. We're up to 7 now in Kenya. Wow. They're not hired yet, but they're, on the way to being hired. They're just replicating already. And the other 3 I got to meet personally while I was over there this past August, and they're just, So that's just how it is. So,
well, that's great that Ratio Christi is reaching out globally like that, and these are our brothers and sisters in Christ. Why wouldn't we want to network with them and hear about what's going on in other places of the world?
Yeah, it's incredible to see people catch the vision and carry it forward. It's so fun. It's a fun job. I love my job.
Yeah, I'd say you do. It sounds pretty exciting, and it's encouraging, really, just to see what you're doing. Well, tell us. We're over the hour mark now. Tell us about the summer of 2024, and
So summer 2024. That was the first summer. So as I said, we had some guys there in Kenya. So when I was there in Kenya in 2023, our current director, Danny, told me of international operations. He said, hey, I got these guys in Nairobi. Would you come and interview them, talk to them? So we became fast friends with these guys. And so I started discipling them online. And really they were discipling me, I tell them. But, we just had a Zoom meeting every couple of weeks and talked and things. And it was really healthy. And so I really caught the vision for the international department while I was there working with them. And so when I was asked to take that over, back in, I guess it was about March 2024 or something like that, step one was to go into the field and see what's going on. So we planned a trip, and I went to 8 different countries in July of 2024. And, even at the first country, I was absolutely astonished. What we would do is we'd go in and set up a conference over whatever cultural issue that they're dealing with at the time, like whatever's the most pressing things. And then we would take that conference, the people that attend it, and then we would start a chapter. Pretty easy model, kind of like an Apostle Paul model. You go into the public square, and those who hear the message, they follow, and then you set up a ministry, and then you go on to the next place, and then disciple the guy that set up the ministry, So Ikechukwu was there. He was in Abuja, Nigeria, which don't know if you realize this or not, but last year Abuja or last year Nigeria, I think there was nearly 4,500 people killed by Muslim extremists in northern Nigeria, and is 90% of the world's martyrs came from Nigeria last year. Astonishing numbers. And so, what do you think? So, if you were going to go to Nigeria, Olin, what kind of conference would you put together?
Wow. I mean, if I could insert this real quick, I thought about this earlier when you were talking. I just started a new class at Veritas International University, and it's one of our most popular classes. We had over 70 students, but over 30 of these students are from Nigeria. They're taking these classes online. And so first class, we have to introduce ourselves and tell a little bit about us. What we do, why we're taking the class, those kind of things. But I will tell you what, I was so convicted as I listened to my brothers and sisters in Nigeria tell about how they had lost family members. They'd lost their mom, their child, their uncle to Boko Haram, and how, they're ready to respond regardless of this physical threat. They're ready and engaging themselves in this class to respond to the these ideas that these Muslims are putting forth, even though they're threatening them with death. Just incredible. What a great example that they're setting for the global church there.
Amen. So I guess if you went to Nigeria knowing all that, probably want to do, and I was ready for this, honestly. I was like, yeah, so my job is to study a country, know it well before I talk to the person well enough to have a conversation anyway, look at their current issues. And so I was ready for him to say, well, we'll just, you did your master's thesis on Islamic apologetics. So we'll just have a conference about that. No, that's not what we talked about.
Right.
To my shock, and this is an educated guy. Ikechukwu is an educated guy. All of our guys are. We typically attract those kind of people. He went through the Colson Fellows and all that apologetics training that they have, which is pretty much like a master's level certificate program in apologetics, And he said, Brother Bill, when you come over, we're going to talk about LGBT, transgenderism, and abortion, to fake his accent. And I'm like, why would we? I was like, with all due respect, like, is that a problem in Nigeria? He said, it's becoming one, and really not yet, but it will be, is how he put it. Now, remember, this was like March, April.
Right.
So as I'm preparing to get over there, and I think I off the top of my head, I think I was there on like July 9th or something like that. And I think it was about a week before that, maybe even on July 6th or something. I see this news thing come through. I listen to Al Jazeera, BBC, Fox News, CNN every morning while I'm making breakfast. I just have a routine, listen to all these news briefings and try to get like the high points of what's going on in the world. And I remember hearing a news briefing one morning that the United Nations was pushing Nigeria to take, I want to say it was 150 million. That seems like the magic number for some reason. We want to give you $150 million, but you have to relax on your human rights violations, which included transgenderism and abortion. And part of the package was they were planning on trying to get Planned Parenthood set up in Nigeria. And it was like, we've got to be kidding me. It was almost prophetic what he did, there with that. And I'm like, well, this is a pretty interesting situation. And so then my next stop was Rwanda. And I talked to my translator down there. I said, if I'm going to introduce apologetics and college campus ministry and all this to all this pastor, because Rwanda was kind of a scouting mission.
Right.
It was like, who's interested in doing this ministry? And so we got a guy in Rwanda now. He's about to come on board. Emmy's a great guy. A couple others as well. So we were like, okay, what do we do here? And then we, it was like, what's the big issue? He said, well, it'd definitely be LGBT. Talk about that. Mm-hmm. And I can remember speaking in Rwanda, and I mentioned that in America, we had killed about 70 million children in abortion clinics. And I remember, I'll never forget this pastor in the back row, grown man, probably in his 50s or 60s, like yelled, like cried so loud that he yelled. I mean, it just split the conference in half. He yelled so loud, just wailed out loud. Wow. And that was convicting, because I was like, when have I ever wailed like that over abortion?
Yeah.
But they were just wrecked. And then of course I go to Kenya, same kind of conversation. Homosexuality is happening there. And so we planned for August for me to come back and systematically plant chapters and have LGBT conferences in a couple of universities and stuff. And then we went from there to South Africa. Again, another big topic in South Africa. In Romania, all the students there were talking about it. Then you get all the way over to Cambodia, and my job there was to introduce apologetics to college students. They'd never heard the word before. So, and many of them didn't even speak English. So after I introduced apologetics and started talking to them, I said, so what would be one issue in Cambodia that you could see this being applied to most? You know what they said? Homosexuality. Homosexuality is a big deal among our. And then you go down to Malaysia, same thing. Progressive Christianity and homosexuality. Philippines blew my mind that they had the SOGI Act there, Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Expression Act, that a transgender individual in Parliament was trying to pass through. And if this thing got passed, Owen, Christian parents would effectively lose their rights to intervene in any sort of homosexual practice with their child. Because
so much for human rights, huh?
Yeah, it's like, where's the rights of the parent? Like, so if a 6-year-old called the government on their mom and dad, the parents would be thrown in jail and the kid would be removed from the home if that thing passed. Thankfully, it's not been passed, but they put it up in front of Parliament a few times now. Don't know if it'll pass or not. I mean, Philippines, I think last time I saw it was like 80% Catholic or something like that. So I don't know if that's, but yeah, it's like when you go to, let's recap this. When you go to, and let's throw like a closed country. I was in a closed country under communist rule before I went on all that trip. Same thing. What's the biggest issue here? Homosexuality. I even talked to a seminary in that country, and they wanted me to come back and do a homosexuality and apologetics conference. I'm like, gosh, like where else could we? And then you put it on the other end of that. In Brazil, I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I mean, it looked like I was in San Francisco, California. I couldn't tell. There's homosexuality all around you and rainbow flags all around you. And it's like, so if you go to country X that I'm not going to say, and then you turn around a couple of months later and go to Nigeria, Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Romania, Malaysia, Cambodia, Philippines. You go to all those countries. That's a pretty huge demographic of countries. All of them saying the same exact things, almost word for word. Where does that come from? It comes from the foreign powers that are enforcing these worldviews. And I'll tell you, Olin, I've always been one of those people to be careful about involving religion and politics too much, muddying that water. And I feel like sometimes it can even hurt the conversation and be a stumbling block to the gospel. But in my position as the incoming director of international operations, in a mission society that teaches apologetics and evangelism, which means take these, like the defense of the faith, and take it out on your campus and share it with others and change your culture and change lives with it.
Right.
How in the world can I not take this seriously? I have to take it very seriously. And when I was in Cambodia, Olin, Cambodia was sadly most famous for Pol Pot. I mean, they've got a rich history there. Siem Reap is filled full of all these old temples and everything. Beautiful place. I mean, it's some of the prettiest things I've ever seen. But also, one of the most horrific things I've ever seen in my life is my buddy took me and we toured the killing fields for Pol Pot. He killed like 3.5 million people in about 36 months and buried them in these fields outside of Phnom Penh, their capital. And there's so many people buried in these fields, Olin, that sometimes during the rainy season, bones will just emerge up out of the ground in certain places. Wow. It's just amazing. It amazingly horrific. Like to think that anybody could be that evil. And he was a communist dictator. And I didn't understand all the history of this, but it's interesting for an American perspective. He was such an evil communist dictator that Ho Chi Minh, our enemy in Vietnam, actually invaded Cambodia and freed the Cambodians from him. How evil do you have to be?
Right.
And so I saw that. And then my next stop was in the Philippines, speaking at universities and conferences and things there. And I'm standing in an American cemetery, which I'm a history person. I love especially World War II and things like that. I'm standing in an American cemetery. And if it weren't for the Americans intervening, people in the Philippines today would be speaking Japanese. I mean, they basically pushed the Japanese off the other side of the island.
Yeah.
But it came at a great cost. Tens of thousands of boys died over there. And I mean, boys, 16 to 20 years old over there died. And they're all marked with it reminded me of Arlington. If you've ever seen the Arlington Cemetery in DC, National Cemetery, just rows and rows. And you know what they were marked with, Olin? Crosses. And man, I'll tell you, that constitutionally did something to me. Like I had that moment. Maybe you've seen Saving Private Ryan, where you just kind of, that man breaks down at the end of it and he starts crying. That's what I did. I can't help it. Like I tear up every time I think about it. It was such an emotional experience because here I was in the killing fields, and then 4 days later in this big American cemetery, and they're all marked with crosses. And the only thing that I could think of was America used to be known for this.
Right.
This is what we were known for. The Christian nation that took care of people. And now we're known for the ungodly nation that is enforcing all this homosexuality on people. That's sad to me.
It is, yeah.
I mean, how could you not be changed after that? And there might be somebody watching this broadcast saying, "Oh my gosh, this guy, he's MAGA and all this." I'm going to tell you something. I'm not MAGA. I'm sorry if that offends people. I'm not a Trump supporter. I mean, I've been pretty open about that. I've got some red flags about Donald Trump that I've been pretty open about. It's not about that for me. What it's about for me is the United States Leftist Party, the European Union, and the United Nations are actively enforcing unbiblical ideas and ruining kids in these cultures. I mean, there's millions of dollars given to South American countries to fund transgender surgeries of minors. We know that now.
Right.
So what can we do about it? Well, I think like in the position that I'm in, being the international director of a mission society that focuses on cultural and worldview and all this stuff, man, I just think I'm in this position where it's like, if I can't make some sort of difference, I've failed,
Right.
Like what else could I do? Like my hands are tied here. This is what's happening. And here's my only response. I don't have another response. This has to stop. We have to speak truth, and we have to be willing to die on some hills that people sometimes are not willing to die on. And that's just where I'm at with it,
Well, I'm right there with you, brother. I have, you and I have somewhat different ministries. You've traveled a little bit and you've been to all these different places, but the only thing I've known for a long time is that God's called me right here in the United States. I'm not opposed to going outside of the United States, but regardless, I believe the answer to all of these problems that we've been talking about is the church.
Yep. Amen.
And it's the church is the solution. And I believe God has given us some time. That was my prayer in the election. Lord, give us some time, and I pray that you would wake up the American church. Unless the American church wakes up and gets away from this entertainment-driven, seeker-driven nonsense and gets back to biblical preaching, equipping the saints to do the work of the service. That means apologetics, evangelism, all this that we've talked about as far as spiritual warfare. I know I'm preaching a sermon now, but this is the answer.
Go ahead.
I mean, this is it. This is what we need. And I can't change the entire world, but I can do my part, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability with the help of the Lord.
I don't know, and you're right. Your focus is like on the home front, and mine has been for years. I agree with you, and some people are hands, some people are feet, but we all got to come together and say, like,
that's right.
It's one of the wonderful things about YouTube channels like this, Olin, is who knows what people overseas are going to watch this video. I mean, you can do the Great Commission from the comfort of your own home right now if you take it seriously.
That's
and we have to, but we have to take this seriously, man. Like we do. I mean, I think Jesus could come back tomorrow. You look at all the crazy stuff's going on in the Middle East. You look at all this crazy. There are nations that are at peace with each other in the Middle East that just shouldn't be. There are nations that are fighting that shouldn't be. There are ungodliness is spreading like a plague all over this earth through it because we live in the information age. And I tell people, I don't think I'm operating at a bias. Like I was doing missions back in 2019 before I ever came to do a master's in apologetics. I just don't know how, my first mission trip to Uganda and Kenya was to teach against the prosperity gospel and to teach against the word of faith movement, because that's spread all over that place down there too, and all over the world and all over America still. I mean, it's just a global problem. I just don't know how in the information age you can do mission work without doing apologetics effectively. I just don't know how you could. I mean, anybody can pick up one of these things anywhere in the world, one of these cell phones, and you can know any ungodly thing, see any ungodly thing you could ever. You don't even have to go to a university. We're focused on universities, but these ideas come from universities, but they're just regurgitated over and over and over again on TikTok and YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to especially reach millennials and Gen Zs overseas, you have to be ready to answer some of these bad Western problems. I get that question all the time. Like, how do you know what to talk about going to all these different countries during these summer trips? I'm like, well, first of all, I talk to the people before I get there. I'm not foolish. I'm just going blind. But all of them basically say the same thing. And I've heard other apologists that had global ministries say the same thing. You get about the same 20 questions anywhere you go in the world anymore.
Right.
We're such a globalized society. It's almost scary.
Yeah, you're right.
There's a lot of countries I go in, Olin. Like when I go to Kenya, I realized just this last August, I didn't even do a currency exchange. I didn't need to. Like that's how globalized we've become. Like you don't even have to exchange currency anymore in a lot of places. It's just wild, man.
It is.
It's a different world. Different world than it was even 25 years ago. I mean,
well, brother, I appreciate you sharing with us tonight. We've covered a lot of information and got the word out a little bit about Ratio Christi, something I probably should have done a long time ago. I love the organization, and I love the students that I work with at Appalachian State. But any closing thoughts that you want to share before we finish up?
Well, we didn't, well, first of all, if anybody would like to give to our mission, you're welcome to do that. I mean, we need all the funding we can get right now. So we're about to go to Romania here next month, and we'll be all over Southeast Asia this summer. But yeah, you can just Google Ratio Christi International Special Projects, and that's our travel account. So and just be praying for us. And if anybody would like me to come talk at your church or anything like that, just reach out to me. You can just Bill Scott at RocioChristi.org. Shoot me an email address. And I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and other channels too. So
what's your YouTube channel?
Oh yeah, the YouTube channel is the Truth Convo. We have a YouTube channel. We're just starting back. We actually started yesterday. I got a little lit up with some things I heard in the news, and basically decided to just do a one-off live video. And so we're opening the season early. I can't shut up about this. So, but yeah, next week I'll be interviewing Douglas Grotas about critical theory and his book Fire in the Streets, and how critical theories fueled Antifa, Black Lives Matters, and some of these other crazy organizations that we saw come and go over the last 5 or 10 years. So yeah, it's just if you like this podcast today, you'll probably like our channel. So check it out, The Truth Convo, on YouTube and Facebook and TikTok, Instagram, and like and subscribe. And we'll be uploading a bunch of different interviews. You'll start seeing the schedule here in the next week or so. Couple of previews would be John Lennox, Doug Grotas, Paul Copan, Michael Icona. So we try to get some of these good Christian thinkers to get on there and hash it out, man. Give a defense for the hope that is within us. So
excellent. Yeah. And in closing, I'll share, as a missionary who, desires to do this kind of thing full time, let me just tell you, you need to give to organizations like Ratio Christi International. The church should be supporting these missionaries, again, because this is something that's biblical. These are some of the most influential young people that are going to be coming up into society in the future. Some of the most influential people right now. So it's a great organization, a great ministry. I highly recommend it. And I think the church should be supporting what you're doing. So if you would, if anybody feels led to give, please contact Bill. And if you have trouble getting a hold of him, please feel free to contact me, and I'll get you his information.
Yep. Yeah. Same for Olin too. Like if you're listening to Olin every week, man, he's a missionary just like me. Like we really like the Levitical priesthood, man. We do our ministry through the generosity and faithful giving of others, and we appreciate everybody that gives, man. One of these days I'll help you throw your crown in heaven at the feet of Jesus. There's no way that me and Tab could do all that we're doing without the generosity of others. And we're just it really does humble you and make you filled full of gratitude to do this kind of work. So we're very, very, very thankful for that.
Amen. Well, brother, we certainly appreciate your ministry and appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. And I think with that, I'm going to close this out unless you have anything else you want to say.
Buddy, I think we've said enough.
All right, brother. If you don't mind hanging around just a few minutes, and I'd love to talk to you just a second before I let you go. I won't keep you long, but
all right.
Again, bless you, brother.
Yep. God bless you. Thank you for having me on, Olin.
Yes, sir.